Hello, welcome to Goodfellas History. I'm your host, Nick,
I'm Garrett.
I'm Davis.
and today we're going to do a Marxism 101 video, where we finally actually talk about the big, bad, mustachioed, bearded genius, man himself, Marx. So, my job as a good Marxist is to educate non-Marxists on Marxism. So, what is Marxism? What are its core tenets? What are its theocratic methods and perspectives? And what the hell is alienation? You guys ready?
I'm really excited for this
Oh,
one.
yeah.
I obviously I have pretty far left leaning tendencies, but I actually don't know too much about this. So this will be a good one, I think.
So,
Yeah,
this is
same.
going to be pretty basic, but I think this is a good introduction. So, the big main man himself, Marx, was born in Trier in 1818. And he would eventually die, I believe in London, in March 14th, 1883. So, he lived to a nice ripe old age. Now, I say that he's the founder of the school of socio-economic thought of Marxism, but his biggest contribution is the theory of historical materialism, ergo dialectic materialism, alienation as a result of social forces, and the beginnings of humanitarian versus academic principles. So you see here is a nice chart, and I think this is a really good way of kind of analyzing the big strokes of Marx. So Marx identifies production as essential for human existence. Production is making things, transforming nature into labor, transforming nature into using tools and labor to transform raw materials into usable goods, food, clothes, shelter, etc. And this is a nice little quote. Men must be a positive to live in order to be able to make history. And then consumption is using those goods to stay alive, ergo. But more importantly, I also like this little chart down here. Marx's theory of dialectical materialism. Okay? In the ancient world, you had masters or nobles and slaves. In the feudal system, you had lords and serfs. In the capitalist system, you had bourgeois and the proletariat. And in the future, these divisions, these dialects, if you will, are removed. You'll have socialism. And then from socialism, you'll have communism. So, I'll explain all these fun concepts.
Wait, I thought socialism and communism were the same thing.
You're telling me they're not?
They're not, but I'll explain it to you, Garrett.
Yeah, but
He's
that's a
being
talking point.
he's being sarcastic. He's pulling out a
It's
right-wing
yeah,
talking point.
liberalism, socialism, communism are the same thing.
Oh.
And sometimes they throw in fascism into there too.
Yeah. Hell, conservatism is socialist if you think about it, if you go far enough back. Okay.
Socialism for the rich.
Yep. Okay. So the big point of contention is that I always want to tell people there are two Marxes. So there's Marx the humanitarian, and then there's Marx the economist. Marx the humanitarian is the first Marx. The Marx that came out of the Enlightenment in his city of Trier, where he was basically studying at the academy. Eventually he became a professor. And he was kind of trying to figure out what he wanted to be. But he came across this concept of alienation. Now, a lot of the intellectuals of the day in Marx, for Marx's case, were heavily influenced by a guy named Hegel. And Hegel came up with this concept of the Hegelian method, or the Hegelian theory of consciousness, which is that consciousness actually, that humanity deals with two realities, the material reality and their conscious reality. Hegel believed that the conscious reality impacts the material reality. Ergo, I reach out and I pick up something. Before I'm able to actually interact with the material reality, I have to think about it. Now, I know this is really deep stuff, but getting back to what Marx would say it's actually the other way around. The material condition that we're in actually helps to shape and form our consciousness. We are merely just responding to it. Why are you going out to reach something? Because you want to grab it. Why does it exist there? Because the material condition allows said object to exist there. Therefore, alienation as a concept is the difference between the material reality of an individual and their consciousness. Ergo, their conscious action leading to their material condition. From this, one can gauge that one is losing a piece of themselves by selling their labor. You are selling a piece of your conscious self by selling your labor. Because you actually have to use your consciousness to do things, right? Selling one's labor decouples one's consciousness from one's creation, thus being seen as a human, but still have the labor. Thus one could be seen as human still, but still have their labor owned by someone else. Thus, wage slavery is born. You guys have any questions?
No, so far this makes a lot of sense, yeah.
How about you,
Yeah,
Garrett?
I don't have any.
I like this nice little chart because it shows how we can become alienated from things.
Yeah, that's what I was actually like reading up as you were going.
It's a pretty nice chart. It's not 100%, but like the concept of alienation as a sociological as well as psychological concept did not exist before Marx. So he's kind of the father of that school of sociological thought.
Oh.
So what the heck is dialectical materialism? It's a historic method of examining the material condition of a given society to explain the social structure, social behavior, and social beliefs. All of which deal with the concept of alienation. Once again, how far removed is your consciousness from your material reality? It primarily focuses on macroeconomic systems. So I have this nice little, materials theory of history. How stuff is produced is what matters most. This is the base of society. Marx calls the rules, customs, and laws and beliefs determining how wealth should be distributed the superstructure. The economic base, economic relations determine social relations, social institutions, and practices, ergo the superstructure. So this is a really important concept to keep in mind. So superstructure is ideas how to distribute surplus. The base is how stuff is produced. This is in relation to technology and interpersonal relationships. This is basically why we will eventually get into these broad category terms that might not be, universal in a sense, but are still influenced by the superstructure. These systems are evolutionary by nature, not structural. Ergo, the ancient system you cannot go from the ancient system straight to capitalism. The sociological as well as base realities of the ancient society would not allow for that transition to take place, because these are sociological. Economics is sociological by nature, influenced by the material reality. Are we still following?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go into each one of these phases to explain how they're different. So the ancient economy, sometime when we began our Neolithic period to around 800 current era. So a long time.
Yeah, you're talking about like almost dawn of humanity starting there.
Basically,
So
from the dawn of humanity, this is the ancient economy. Before mankind was able to settle down in the city-states, you really didn't have this. So we really have no hard evidence of what kind of economic systems that existed other than proto-communist tribal systems. But I'm not going to go over that because Marx himself doesn't go over this, and it's more theoretical than anything else. The important thing is that once civilization exists and economic systems are able to form as we know them, it is a master-slave system throughout the world, might I add, where human beings take ownership of other human beings. The objectification of humanity is in the name of material development. So, ergo the pyramids, ergo a lot of the major monuments and the productivity of a given society and the wealth that grows out of the society was at the result of the slave caste basically operating within the master-slave system. Once again, I'm going to talk about the macro versus to micro. This is a broad concept and describe the dominant system, ergo the superstructure. Did everywhere have slaves during this period of time? Was slavery existent in every single society, every single community at this time?
I wouldn't say every single one, but
exactly.
Yeah.
But the predominant economic forces, ergo the macro predominant economic forces, were broadly ascribed to this kind of system. Whether it is Han China, Sonnet Empire, or the Roman Empire, all these systems rely on the master-slave system as the primary means of economic development. This doesn't mean that everybody in society is either a master or a slave. It's just this dialectic. The master being the person that has absolute de-alienation, ergo, they don't have to sell their labor. Their conscious thought and their material reality are both intertwined. The slave, on the other hand, is as far removed from humanity as possible. They are objectified. Literally, they are an object, dehumanized to a point where they are now a median for labor. Not all systems look and act the same, but function the same. This is a really important concept, because this applies to all systems. More importantly, masters own the means of production as well as the labor force. They own both.
Yeah.
In order to do so, you have to be dehumanized. The absolute dehumanization of the labor force thus complete alienation. Slaves have no right to their conscious thought. They have no right.
Would it be fair? Sorry, would it be kind of fair to say, obviously it's not the same thing, but our prison system has kind of a ancient economy, if you will?
Well, what Marx would say on a micro level, yes. But we don't live in the ancient economy. We live in a capitalist economy.
Yeah.
But yes, this is a holdover. There are holdovers. This is why Marx says this is evolutionary.
Uh-huh.
It's not structural as much as it is evolutionary. It grows out of something. And so there's going to be holdovers. It's kind of like how human beings evolve too. Like we have a pancreas, even though we really don't need it. Right?
Yeah, true.
So,
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those, well, not pancreas.
Appendix, you mean?
An
Yeah.
appendix. We have an appendix.
Yeah,
I
pancreas?
wasn't gonna say anything. I was just like, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Well, it's like
or
we
your
evolved
gallbladder. You
Yeah,
don't need that.
we have those for something that is no longer necessary. That's no longer a primary function for our existence or our life. But our body still goes to that. Materials and resources that our body consumes goes to maintaining that.
Yeah.
Your hippocampus, you don't need that.
Exactly.
Oh, God. Your amygdala.
Yeah, amdula oblongata.
Oh my gosh.
So, from this system rises feudalism. Now, once again, this is an evolutionary concept. Did feudalism begin at 800 CE? Most likely not. Because as you notice, the ancient economy still is up into that point. This is evolutionary by nature. And of course, it's the Lord-Serf relationship. One could make the argument that in the year 500, China had a feudal system in place. Well, wait, Nick, it's before this period of time. Yes, we're talking about it being the predominant or the superstructure. Ideas of how to distribute surplus. It's the overall macro system. So, lords own the means of production in the name of the king. Now, this is the difference. In the master-slave relationship, masters owned the means of production as well as the labor force. And it was just for the master's interests. In feudalism, the lord owns the means of production in the name of the king. The king rules in the name of God or gods. Thus, they have a mandate of heaven. Lords own the land in the name of the king. So the king basically owns all the territory. The king gives his lieutenants, ergo his lords, slices of land to basically maintain them for given services. Serfs in this system are different from slaves in that they are humanized, but deal with alienation and objectivization due to being tied to the land and not owning what they produce. So serfs have a right to their consciousness. But they still deal with issues of alienation and even some issues of objectification because serfs oftentimes are tied to the land that they're on, which means when lords exchange territories, the serfs don't go along with their lord, they stick with the land. Any questions?
No, I mean, it makes sense. It's just interesting to see, like, the slow progression.
Yeah.
Well, I can go into a deeper a deeper convo when it comes to this, or I can make the argument the reason why the ancient economy became feudal was due to material realities. So a lot of people ask, why do these take effect? Well, during this period of time where you have the master and slave systems, you see mass urbanization, but societies that are not dealing with a lot of plagues. There's mass food production. So these urban centers, these locales that are primarily urban and commercial, are able to sustain large populations. But the environment, ergo the climate, changes from the ancient economy to the feudal economy, and where diseases are more prevalent. And this is just due to the fact that diseases evolve in different climates. And in both societies, there's a lot of vectors for those diseases to find hosts. This leads to a natural sense of destabilization. Workforces across the board are lost. So during the ancient economy, slaves were plentiful. By the time we get to the feudal era, manpower is scarce. So having a ready set of people tied to labor, ergo the fields that they work, is a good way of sustaining and stabilizing your economy. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. The mercantile systems. This is not a different economy. It's feudal in nature, but laid the groundwork for capitalism. It's a shift from land-based economics to trade-based systems. It's not a true economic system in the sense of that Marx, but it is a good example of the evolutionary nature of economics. It also led to the rise of the merchant class, aka the bourgeois, as a political force. But more importantly, the reason why I don't call these mercantile systems capitalism is because capitalism cannot exist without the modern state.
Uh-huh.
Now we have capitalism.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Capitalism exists from around 1600 CE to the current day. It is the employer-employee system, or the bourgeois and proletariat relationship. Capitalism needs a modern state to exist, and in order to exist. This is one of the reasons why I don't agree with the libertarian argument, because if you don't have capitalism, if you don't have a modern state, you just have mercantile feudalism, where the merchant class is, yes, powerful, and can be the primary political force, but they don't have an institution in place to protect their interests. They now have to deal with, well, the lords and vassals, people who have large armies and can sustain large armies. The state, on the other hand, has absolute power when it comes to this. And thus, capitalism comes from in many forms, such as mercantile, industrial, finance, and or consumer systems, but it requires the commodification of all resources to open the forces of the market, meaning that things need to become commodified. Well, how do we know what things are commodified? Well, they are legal tender. They are legal things that can be traded on open markets. Therefore, you need a state to basically allow things to become commodified, and therefore becoming assets. Assets are protected under law. The market is now the institution that is tied to the nation state and the currency that props it up. So this is the reasons why we move from having gold exchanges and silver exchanges to having paper currency. Now these currencies can still be backed up by gold and silver, but it's now these currencies that are the primary forces that prop up the market. Markets tend to be more nationalistic initially, but they can become global. You guys have any questions?
No. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Sorry, I'm listening to you and like going over the notes as well to try and like cement ideas on that for the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I love this quote from Adam Smith's Wealth of Nation. It's not very unreasonable that the rich should be contributed to the public's expense, not only in proportion to the revenue, but something more than proportion. So he's advocating for a progressive tax.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
So this is also really important, because Marx would also go further in pointing out this is the rise of the liberal class. You know, this correlates with the Enlightenment, right? So it correlates with the rise of Locke, of Rousseau, with Hobbes. All these people will begin to come out of the system, and all of them argue for actually a strong state. But that relationship to that state is kind of a pesky issue, because they want to have the modern state. Now, why is the modern state different from, say, the systems that existed in feudalism and the ancient economy?
Well, you have a more industrious kind of environment. You're able to mass produce stuff more.
No, that's not really it. It's the state's relationship to its citizenry that's different. So, in order for a modern state to exist, it needs to be legitimate. What makes it legitimate?
I feel like there might be a few factors, but a legitimate modern state would probably first off be capital, a certain kind of like currency and whatnot that is distributed between.
Well, it really comes into the relationship of power. So, in order for someone to have a modern state, it needs to be representative in some way. The king does not rule by the mandate of heaven. The king rules by the mandate of the citizenry. This is also around the same time that the English Civil War took place, which was a war between the nature of the crown. It was a fight between Parliament, the representative body of the citizenry, versus the crown, which argued that it ruled in the name of God. We notice that this issue actually pops up across Europe for the centuries that go on. And this also affects the Chinese and as well as the Japanese. So it's the idea of having constitutions. The state now exists as an institution, as a means to an end, but it's an all-powerful institution. Well, if it's all-powerful, this gets to the liberal paradox that I've talked about before. And for the liberal class, the main advocates of enlightenment, the state is something that you don't want to pay for. You can't live with it, but you also can't live without it. Because basically, you need a modern state to protect your commodities, your assets, your resources, your wealth, your capital. There's a reason why this is called capitalism. Is capital wealth? No, it's not.
No.
No, it's not. Capital is excess wealth. So, it's wealth that you can use to invest in other ventures. You need an institution to protect you with that, because the banks and the various companies aren't going to always be honest when it comes to that. So you need an institution that puts up laws and can provide a force to protect your assets, to protect your capital, with either legal remedy or force. But anything that's powerful enough to protect your assets and your wealth is also powerful enough to take it from you.
Yeah.
But you don't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
So that's the liberal paradox when it comes to the state. You can't live with it, you can't live without it, and you don't want to pay for it. Now, for Marxists, we point out that this is actually a better system than feudalism. Why? Well, the proletariat is no longer objectified. Which is nice.
Yeah, I think that's a big win.
So, the proletariat no longer is objectified. They're human beings. They have rights now. But they still don't have that connection. They're still dealing with this issue of alienation. In fact, this is the key problem, because never before in human history had alienation become so apparent. Never before had you been so far removed from your labor, Marx would argue, because you are selling your labor. In the serf systems, you had a job to do, but once that job was taken care of, anything of excess was for yourself. In the slave system, you weren't even a human to begin with. So the idea of alienation wasn't even a problem, because you were just an object, unfortunately. But for the proletariat, you are alienated from your labor. you are forced to sell it as a means of survival. You, therefore, as a proletariat, are alienated. This is the primary problem, because you are removed from the means of production. You don't control the means of production. But labor has power. Labor is literally a force. So, now let's get to the tenets of socialism. These are core tenets of socialism. It's the rejection of alienation. We do not need this dialectical difference. Labor needs to control the means of production, thus gaining back ownership of their material reality. Democracy is a medium of governance for this. So, there are questions to be brought up from this. Are we interested in equity or equality as socialists?
I don't want to say I don't want to say equality. It's like equity.
Yeah.
Some would say equality. Are we interested in revolution or reform?
No, we're interested in reform.
Some would say revolution, but I would say reform.
See, there we go.
I would hope everyone here would say reform. Otherwise, we have words.
The most important thing is that the proletariat will lead the uprising and seize absolute power over the state. So the dictatorship of the proletariat is less of one person ruling and more of absolute democracy. The proletariat or the mass seize control of the state. And thus, as socialists, eventually over time, they'll replace the modern state with communism. Communism is the system of governance that will be applicable. We will no longer need the nation state or the modern state as a mechanism of governing itself. We would have communism, or another variation, Anarcho-Syndicalism. So this is a really good picture of what Anarcho-Syndicalism would be like. You have self-managed workplace. You elect delegates to a syndicate. These syndicates elect delegates to a federation, and thus the federation governs.
Okay.
So instead of there being states, imagine if everybody at the hospital that we work at, we are self-governing and we elect delegates to a meeting of all the hospitals in the state. Okay? That's the syndicate. That syndicate then elects delegates for all the hospitals in the nation to the federation. And at the federation, they'd be able to make decisions for the hospitals. We'd be self-governing. Does it make sense?
I mean, it's
that makes sense.
very interesting.
Well, the way to think of this is that the federation is like a mega union.
Yeah.
And so that
I
federation...
think it's hard to imagine this like being implemented because it's never really been done. And so it's hard for me to like really like put it in, like think about it in my head.
Mm-hmm. So a good way to think about this is self-managed workplace is self-governing.
Yeah.
The syndicate governs the community at whole. So maybe the syndicate doesn't represent just, hospital workers. Maybe the syndicate of this area represents all organizations. And out of all those organizations, they send delegates to the federation, where it represents all organizations. And in this federation is where the governance happens. So it's federalization. This is when anarchists talk about federalization, this is what they mean. It's this idea of having these structured systems that are governed from the bottom up. Communism, on the other hand, is a little bit different because it's more localized. But it's hard to imagine this because we are so deeply invested in capitalism right now.
Yeah.
So the important thing to take into consideration is a person living in the ancient economy would not say, "I'm living in the ancient economy." Therefore, the systems that exist right now are master and slave. We are objectifying the slaves. That's not the reality they live in. This is the core concept of Marx's argument of dialectical materialism and alienation. This is why he rejects the Hegelian method. What he is basically saying is, no, our material condition, the material reality that we're in, actually shapes our consciousness. The people who lived in ancient Egypt would not have questioned the existence of slaves in ancient Egypt. And they would not have been interested in the moral paradigm that brought up, because these morals and these issues would not have been an issue for them due to the material reality that they were raised in. This is why, say, in the United States, there are a lot of people who still hold to, the red, white, and blue, hardcore moral paradigm that we have in our society. And oftentimes get really upset when people challenge that. This is the material reality that they're in. So this is why the material condition is so important. The material condition is the material reality that we're in. Our conscious self is completely 100% interpersonal. Nobody can truly know if someone else is truly conscious, because consciousness is completely 100% an interpersonal experience. We assume these things and we base this off hard evidence, but this is why consciousness is only a theory. It's unprovable. By definition.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So. Questions?
No, I don't really have any questions. I do think it's an interesting idea to view almost understanding from being your material conditions. I've always thought that's kind of interesting in that you could almost make the argument even nowadays. You look at the difference between third world countries and first world countries, and it's obviously going to shape a lot of your worldview and understanding of social hierarchies and whatnot. So I do think this is really interesting to look at and kind of delve into.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any questions?
I don't think so.
Anything pegging your mind, making you concerned?
I definitely think we can go more in a socialist direction, but I don't know if, at least right now, if I would consider myself a Marxist.
Well, this is a fun thing about Marxist thought is that I think that in some ways we all are, because the reality is our society is so heavily influenced by Marx. So when you deal with concepts of sociological as well as psychological alienation, that's a Marxist perspective. It's this idea that this conscious self is removed from their reality. So when people in our society are dealing with alienation, what it's really is as conscious selves, they feel like they are not in touch with their reality. This is why mental health is so prevalent in capitalist societies, or mental health issues are. Because you are removed from your labor, and you're selling your labor. Anything that interferes with your ability to contribute to that labor, ergo mental health issues or interpersonal issues, are seen as distractions, or cutting into the profitability of your ability to sell your labor. It also fixates on hyperconformity, because you are selling your labor, everybody's selling their labor. Normalization is a means by which to enforce this. So I would say, yes, you guys are now Marxists.
Yeah.
In least
like
in
I
a
said,
basic
we
sense.
can go more in this direction. Maybe, because, when it comes to, labels, I don't even really label myself, besides saying, I'm probably just a leftist. Just because, I feel like even especially in America, I don't know if we've ever really gone to the left, even in any, regard. I feel like it's just very much center. And so until we kind of go more in that direction, I don't know if I necessarily, want to put a bunch of stock into this idea of communism, if that makes sense.
Communism... So Marx's overall goal was eventually getting into communism.
Mm-hmm.
But Marx's real focus, if you actually read his literature, was focused on the democratization of society. The liberalization of society. Marx was not rejecting the Enlightenment. In fact, Marxism could be considered a continuation of Enlightenment thinking. It just expands beyond the economic reality that exists at the time. Marx's argument is that capitalism is, by definition, a product of feudalism. It's not a product of the Enlightenment. It's that the material forces that led to mercantilism eventually led to the rise of capitalism, because the merchant class, the bourgeoisie, became a political force. Because they became...
What I've always What I've always found interesting about that as well, sorry to interject on that, but I've always thought it's interesting that conservatives tend to belittle a lot of the Enlightenment, and they really almost like view it antagonistic. And I think part of it is because of that as well. I've always found that kind of interesting.
Well, conservatives like the nice byproducts of the Enlightenment, but if you look at the history of conservatism, it's always been the rejection of the reality. So conservatism isn't unconcerned with the material condition. This is why conservatives often hyperfixate on moral realities. They believe in the Hegelian method, ergo consciousness shapes reality. So if we're all good little boys and all little girls, therefore the material condition around us is going to eventually become good. The reason why Marx rejected this, and it's not because Hegel was like a radical religious nut, he wasn't. He was an Enlightenment thinker, is that it puts the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
So what Marx's whole point was, when it comes to this, is that the material condition helps actually structure our reality. This is why people who tend to come from poor communities oftentimes hold more ignorant or bigoted opinions. And it's not because human beings are naturally more bigoted or more intolerant. It's that access to information, access to knowledge, and their perceptions are representative of the material reality that they're in. So a good way to think about this, base, mean conditions can help produce base, mean people. So Marxists, this is why I say that, the socioeconomic, the material condition really does matter for a lot of people. There are people out there that are incredibly wealthy, but they're incredibly base and mean. Now, why are they base and mean? Well, they have to dehumanize other people in order for them to justify morally their position. Why? Because we now live in a capitalist system. The questions of human rights, human identity, and human value innate are Enlightenment thoughts, and we now live in a society of human value. This is why fascists oftentimes completely reject the Enlightenment, because in order to hold fascist positions, you have to believe that some human life is more valuable than other human life. Thus, therefore, humanity itself, human life, is commodified. It has to be a resource in which, some life is worth more than others.
I guess that's what I meant when I was saying Republicans. I actually meant more fascist.
Well,
so a little farther.
Republicans are essentially just fascists now.
Yes.
At this stage of the game, I think it's
I guess that's what I was leading up into, is that the Enlightenment
they're not Nazis, but they're the Diet Coke of fascism right now.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was meaning by that, is a lot of fascist tendencies is to reject the Enlightenment because it focuses on a lot of human condition and
Well, notice how much they call for the rejection of human value.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And this is oftentimes why the only human beings that they advocate for are the voiceless.
True.
So the children and or babies or fetuses.
Abortions are such
the future, the next generation. They often talk about what are we going to do for our kids or the next generation. I don't want my grandkids to deal with X. But what do your grandkids actually think about that? It's a position of putting forth morals before reality. Now, I'm not against morality being important, but what it really comes down to, it's about disenfranchising human beings for the sake of morality to maintain power. So once again, I say that we're all Marxists now because in truth, if you are a leftist, you have to in some way, shape, or form embrace a certain level of Marxism.
Yeah.
Garrett, you can be a half Marxist.
No,
Well, I'm not saying I'm pro. Well, I like a lot of the ideas. I'm not trying to say I'm anti-Marxist. And I don't, honestly, if people call me a Marxist, I don't really care. I do think we need to go in more of that direction is all I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to make an argument against it.
Then just call yourself a Marxist, Gary.
All right, I'm a Marxist, sure. It's these labels all become the same thing, especially to the right wing.
Yeah.
Marxism, communism, socialism, it's all the same.
All good leftists, all good leftists are Marxists. But not all Marxists are leftist. No. Not all leftists are Marxists, but there are people who call themselves Marxists who really are not Marxists. And they're not leftists. And, this, I'm going to make this really quick. This is one of the reasons why when listening to, say, Mel, or Professor Flowers, I reject them wholeheartedly. Because, once again, are they really doing a Marxist critique?
No, they're not.
Because, I mean, the whole point is the democratization. Marx's whole point, and the whole point of Marxism, is to break down these dialectical realities. We can make the argument that, say, in South Africa, people who are white probably disproportionately own and control a large portion of the economy.
Yeah.
But that's not an issue of whiteness. What is that an issue of?
I'd say that would just be
Capitalism. Imperialism and colonialism are offshoots. They're institutions that are derived to expand and entrench capitalist interests. So, this is an issue, once again, of socioeconomic relations. So, how does one disempower these institutions? Because here's the real question. Let's say that the white community in South Africa is removed. Are those power dynamics then going to be handed off to other people? And is it going to be the same?
Probably, yeah.
No. Well, yes and no. It's not going to change the material condition of most South Africans.
I guess that's what I'm saying, is it's not going to change the material conditions.
So, it's like if, let's say that we get rid of Jeff Bezos. Is that going to change our markets? No.
I wish. But
Amazon
no.
Amazon's going to operate the same way. I mean, and a good way of thinking about this is that there's a reason why Amazon came into existence in the first place.
Yeah.
Same reason why Walmart exists. This is the material reality that we live in. So in order for us to change that and get rid of Walmart and get rid of Amazon, we need to change the way that materials are distributed in our society. Ergo, we need to change the power structures and the power dynamics that are in our society. One could make the argument we need to make them more democratic. The more democratic we make our systems, the less likely you'll have systems like Amazon and Walmart come into existence because they can't monopolize. The reason why these institutions are able to profit the way they do is that they're able to form monopoly chains. That monopolization allows them to maximize their profits, thus having control, maybe not absolute control, but considerable control of how resources are distributed in our society.
I think if we got rid of that, I wouldn't have my espresso machine.
I know. The horror.
Wow. That's the one thing stopping us from achieving communism is Davis's espresso machine.
What can I say? Guys, sorry. I'm no longer a leftist. I'm a capitalist, boys.
Uh-oh.
Just take off your mask, Jeff Bezos. Come on.
Okay, guys. You guys have any questions?
No, I mean, it makes sense.
I don't think I do.
Sense.
Okay.
I think at the end of the day, I'm not sure what my ideal left-wing society would look like yet, and that's why I haven't committed to a lot of labels on it. But I do know at least bare necessities of what I want to see out of it, and I think once we could get some of those going, I'd be able to more cement the rest of my ideas on that.
That's how I feel.
So I would say, in closing, I call myself a Marxist, but I am not dogmatic, nor am I interested in entrenching a sense of orthodoxy, because I think that's kind of stupid. People are going to have different interpretations of all sorts of things, and I'd rather have people have some sense of liberty in those interpretations, because oftentimes the very same kind of people who tend to be orthodox with this stuff and dogmatic with this stuff are also kind of more right-wing than they are left-wing.
Yeah.
And so the whole point of when I say I'm a Marxist is that I believe in taking a Marxist perspective on social economic arguments. I don't turn to Marx for policies, though. I don't turn to Marx for political reform, which is greatly, left to be, desired. I turn to Marx to have an overall perspective, and allows me to analyze history as well as the current situation in a certain way that I think is most applicable to the left-wing discourse. So the reason why we have Jeff Bezos isn't because he's evil, or that, I don't know, or that there's an evil cabal that's choosing him. Evil doesn't matter in this. Jeff Bezos is a product of the reality that we're in. Now, it's not fatalist. It's that the systems that exist right now create a percentage of likelihood of outcomes. Like, it could have been a completely different family instead of the Waltons that founded something like Walmart. It just requires us to understand that individuals have a part to play, but these are systemic issues. This feeds into concepts like systemic racism. The problem with racism in American society, at least right now today, isn't so much individuals holding particular bigotry towards specific peoples. It's that our institutions, the way our laws are written, the way our institutions have enforced said laws, how they've been prescribed to enforce said laws, how they've been incentivized to enforce said laws, are racist by nature. That's a Marxian perspective on this, because it deals with the concept of structure. It's a material condition. It's a material reality that we're in right now.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to view it like how I view the police.
Mm-hmm.
Hate the system, be okay with the cops individually.
Mm-hmm. Love the band, hate Sting.
Yeah.
Okay, guys.
Yeah.
Well, this has been Goodfellas History. If you like what you've seen here, please like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, have a wonderful day.
Bye, guys.
Peace.